Here is a list of everyone who was sentenced at Bristol Magistrates Court between Monday, February 4th and Saturday, February 9th. Monday, February 4th, Jonathan Mays, 52, of Lodge Street, Bristol, was sent to prison for 10 weeks, for failing to comply with supervision requirements following release from prison, by failing to attend appointments, and fraud by using a stolen bank card, and doing so while subject to a community order, showing a flagrant disregard for court orders and for people and their property. He must also pay compensation of £49.84 and costs of £115. Luke Willis, of Jamaica Street, Bristol, was handed a 12-month conditional discharge and ordered to pay £200 compensation, for damaging a shop door worth £200 belonging to Co-op and for failing to surrender to custody. Noel Hall, 38, of No Fixed Abode, was handed a community order requiring him to do 80 hours of unpaid work, for assault by beating. He must also pay costs of £85. John Hillier, 36, of Jamaica Street Hostel, Bristol, was handed a 10-week prison sentence, suspended for 12 months, for using threatening, abusive or insulting words or behavior to another person with intent to cause fear of violence, and failing to surrender to custody. The reason for the sentence was his list of previous convictions and for committing the offense while subject to a community order. He must also pay costs of £615. Jamie Crowley, 30, of Parkwall Road, Longwall Green, had his community order revoked and was resentenced with a new community order, after applying to amend it by suspending the curfew requirement on the grounds that he is working away. His new community order with electronic tag requires him to remain indoors at home between 7 p.m. and 4 a.m. on Fridays, Saturdays and Sundays only, for a period of 19 days. He was fined £200. The original offense was drink driving. Christopher Mihai Lungu, 26, of Tredegar Road, Speedwell, Bristol, was fined £100 and ordered to pay £190 costs and compensation, for assault by beating. Darren Noble, 40, of Avonvale Road, Bristol, was handed a 4-month prison sentence, suspended for 2 years, and a community order with curfew, for possessing an offensive weapon, a baseball bat, in public, and damaging a van to the value of £500. His curfew will last 10 weeks and require him to remain indoors between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. each day and will be electronically monitored. He must also pay costs and compensation of £540. The reason for the sentence was his history of violent behavior and of failing to comply with non-custodial sentences. He offended whilst in drink and it was a deliberately planned attack. Robert James Carter, 40, care of Brian Carter, Bush Avenue, Little Stoke, had his restraining order varied. Ashley Line, 47, care of Autoline Limited, The Synergy Building, Charlton Road, Bristol, had an application to discharge his restraining order refused because the offence was a serious assault. The order was made only a short time ago and for 2 years and the court feel it's too early to remove the prohibitions. Hassan Sharif, 35, of St. James Road, Salford, was handed a community order with 6-month curfew and electronic tag, requiring him to remain indoors between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. each days, for intentionally touching a woman aged 16 or over and that touching was sexual when she did not consent. He must also do 300 hours unpaid work and pay compensation of £1,500. The offence happened in OMG in Frog Lane, Bristol City Centre. Christopher Franklin, 34, of Pile Hill Crescent, Totterdown, was sent to prison for 10 weeks for 2 counts of breaching a restraining order and doing so while subject to a suspended sentence order for harassment, stalking and using violence to secure entry to premises. He must also pay costs of £200. Luke Perkins, 32, of Kingscombe, Gurney Slade, Redstock, was handed a community order requiring to do 100 hours of unpaid work and take part in a program for 42 days, for assault by beating and damaging a mobile phone. He must also pay costs of £170. Tuesday, February 5, Josh Fudge, 24, of Caldecott Close, Willsbridge, Bristol, was handed a community order requiring him to do 100 hours of unpaid work and take part in a program for 10 days, for 2 charges of assault by beating and damaging property worth under £5,000. He must also pay costs of £170. Carl Lewis, 32, care of Spring Gardens, Bristol, was fined £120 for failing to comply with a community order by failing to keep in touch with a probation officer, by not attending an appointment and failing to inform them of a change of address. He was directed to be detained in the courthouse and his detention was deemed served by reason of time already spent in custody. The community order was imposed in 2014 and since that time he has not committed any further offences and has turned his life around. Mass brawl outside Wetherspoon pub captured on video. Jack Walker, 18, of Holmes Street, St. Phillips, Bristol, had his application to amend the requirements of his community order refused when he failed to attend. The application asked to amend the requirements of the community order by including the back garden of the property within the curfew area on the grounds that Mr. Walker is a smoker and is unable to smoke in the property as he lives with a mother who suffers from asthma. Kingsley Bothwell, 20, of Cliff Court Drive, Frenchay, South Gloucestershire, was disqualified from driving for 13 months and fined £100 for drink driving. He must also pay costs of £115. John William Body, 40, of Longlands House, Strawbridge Road, Barton Hill, Bristol, was handed a 12-month conditional discharge for stealing coffee and bacon worth £17.50 from Co-op. He must pay £8 compensation and £105 costs. Sebastian Seipel, 27, of No Fixed Abode, was handed a community order requiring him to do 150 hours of unpaid work, for assaulting a female student paramedic assaulting a male emergency care assistant. He must pay costs and compensation of £285. Mihal Morris, 32, of Longcross, was handed a community order requiring him to do 120 hours of unpaid work and was disqualified from driving for 24 months, for drink driving. He must pay costs of £170. Margaret Y.K. Pang, 69, of Chesterfield Road, St. Andrews, Bristol, was handed a community order with rehabilitation activity requirement for theft from shop and doing while subject to a community order for theft from a shop. She must pay costs of £170. Kyle Paul, 22, of Nichols Lane, Winterbourne, South Gloucestershire, was fined £80 and ordered to pay costs of £115 for cannabis possession. Michael James Anderson, 38, of Connaught Road, Bristol, was handed a 26-week prison sentence, suspended for 12 months, for producing 19 cannabis plants. He must carry out 200 hours of unpaid work. The reason for the sentence was the number of plants and the sophistication of the equipment used to grow them. He must also pay costs of £200. Adam Wardman Barmakey, 34, of Spinderwood, Shiplate Road, Leeton, Weston-super-Mare, was handed a community order requiring him to do 150 hours of unpaid work, for 2 counts of assault and damaging a mobile phone and store stock to the value of £350. He must pay costs and compensation of £720. What is a magistrate, and who can be one? Image, Dave Betts. Monher Mohammed Ben Yusuf, 30, of Victor Road, Bristol, was handed a community order and was disqualified from driving for 24 months for failing to provide a sample of breath at a police station. He must do 120 hours of unpaid work and pay costs of £170. Stephen Feeney, 59, of Collinson Road, Bristol, was handed a community order and was disqualified from driving for 28 months for failing to provide a sample of breath. His community order includes a 12-week curfew with electronic monitoring requiring him to remain indoors between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. each day. He must also pay costs of £170. Martina Layla Ricketts, 26, of Emerson Square, Bristol, was disqualified from driving for 8 months for driving without insurance or without a driving license. He was fined £200 and ordered to pay costs of £115. Ian Smith, 53, of Barber Gardens, Hartcliffe, Bristol, was disqualified from driving for 36 months and handed a community order for failing to provide a sample of breath at a police station and failing to stop his Porsche Cayman for police. The community order includes a 6-month curfew with electronic monitoring requiring him to remain indoors between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. each day. He must also pay costs of £170. Damien Derbyshire, 32, of Coronation Road, Kingswood, Bristol, was handed a community order with 8-week curfew with electronic monitoring requiring him to remain indoors between 9 p.m. and 6 a.m. Monday, Wednesday and Sunday and 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. all other days of the week, for damaging a car to the value of £4,178.77. He must also pay compensation of £1,500. Nicholas Slade, 53, of Prospect House, Severn Beach, Bristol, was handed a domestic violence protection order. Michelle Smart, 27, of Blakeney Grove, Nailsea, was handed a domestic violence protection order. Claire Dibble, 39, of Inns Court Green, Knoll West, Bristol, had a community order revoked for failing to comply with it by failing to attend appointments, and was handed a new community order. She must take part in a rehabilitation activity requirement. The original offense was theft and assault on a police constable. Helen Osborne, 41, of St Mungo's, Hillside Street, Totterdown, had a community order revoked for failing to comply with it by failing to attend appointments, and was handed a new community order. She must now be under a curfew for 8 weeks with electronic monitoring, requiring her to remain indoors between 8 p.m. and 8 a.m. every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday. The original offenses were theft from shop, 2 counts of fraud by false representation, taking a vehicle without consent and failing to surrender to bail. Richard Pierce, 29, of the Crescent, Old Down, Bristol, was fined £200 for failing to comply with a community requirement of a suspended sentence order by failing to attend for unpaid work. Ashley Smith, 21, of Burley Grove, Bristol, had a community order revoked for failing to comply with it by failing to attend for unpaid work, and was fined £245 and ordered to pay costs of £65. The original offense was harassment. Savannah May Stewart, 22, of Judith Herman House, Alexandra Park, Bristol, had a community order revoked for failing to comply with it by failing to attend for unpaid work, appointments or a rehabilitation activity requirement group sessions. She was handed a new community order with rehabilitation activity requirement and appointments. The original offenses were unlawful violence, racially aggravated assault, assaulting a police constable and failing to surrender to bail. Philip Webb, 56, of Boat Papillion, Portishead Key Marina, Newfoundland Way, Portishead, had a community order revoked due to ill health. He was handed a new community order with rehabilitation activity requirement and appointments. The original offense was assault by beating. Paul Christopher John Lippett, 33, of the Rising Sun Public House, Ashton Road, Bristol, was fined £60 and ordered to pay costs of £20 for failing to comply with a community order by failing to attend for unpaid work. Middle Croker, 28, of Black Boy Inn, White Ladies Road, was handed a community order requiring her to do 150 hours of unpaid work and was made subject to a restraining order for assault causing actual bodily harm. She must also pay costs of £170. Gary Williams, 31, of Creswick Road, Knoll, Bristol, was fined £125 and ordered to pay costs of £130 for using threatening or abusive words or behavior or disorderly behavior likely to cause harassment, alarm or distress. Mark Ovent, 53, of Craven Close, Longwall Green, South Gloucestershire, was fined £807 and ordered to pay costs and compensation of £980 for assault in Filton Avenue, Horfield. The court register states, the court is not satisfied that a banning order would help to prevent violence or disorder at or in connection with any regulated football matches because this is not a football-related offence. There is no evidence that the defendant used the words Red Army, and no evidence this was the motivation for the assault. This was an alcohol-fueled act of aggression in front of women and children, but no evidence that the defendant acts in this manner either at football matches or otherwise. J. Louise Cutter, 28, of Kelbrook Crescent, Brampton Cotterell, South Gloucestershire, was disqualified from driving for 12 months and fined £200 for drink driving. He must also pay costs of £115. Isaac Roger, 20, of York Place, City Centre, Bristol, was handed a 1-month conditional discharge and ordered to pay compensation of £128 for damaging a window to the value of £378. Wednesday, February 6, an application within criminal proceedings states that, unless an exemption is obtained within 2 months of this order, that the pit bull terrier-type dog called Luna shall be destroyed, which is owned by John Mason, Bevelmore Road, Bristol. Keith Evans, 43, of Chelmsford Walk, St Anne's, Bristol, was made subject to a community order requiring him to have treatment for drug dependency, for stealing a strimmer and chainsaw from a pet shop after entering as a trespasser. He must pay compensation and costs of £386.99. Jordan Jenkins, 20, of Bracewell Gardens, Henbury, Bristol, had 20 hours of unpaid work added to his community order for failing to comply with it by failing to attend for unpaid work, making a total of 80 hours. Jonathan Dean, 35, of Logos House, Wade Street, St Paul's, Bristol, was made subject to a community order and fined £160 for stealing a debit card, fraud by using the debit card, using threatening or abusive words or behavior or disorderly behavior likely to cause harassment, alarm or distress. 2 counts of using abusive or insulting words or behavior with intent to cause fear of violence, one of which was racially aggravated, failing to surrender to court and committing an offense while subject to a conditional discharge for 3 counts of theft from shop. He must also pay costs of £277. He was also convicted of possession of the drug spice. Craig Purnell, 51, of Feathers Court, Novers Park Road, Knoll, was handed a 16-week prison sentence, suspended for 12 months, and a community order with 8-week curfew and electronic monitoring, for producing cannabis plants. He must remain indoors between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. each day. He must also pay costs of £200. The court register states this was a large-scale operation and defendant has previous conviction of a like nature. Gordon Andrews, 71, of Coronation Road, Downend, Bristol, was fined £70, ordered to pay costs of £30 and had 3 points put on his license, for speeding. Bristol Magistrates Court, Image, Dave Betts, Liam Thomas Haynes, 25, of Cranley Court Road, Yate, was fined £78 and ordered to pay costs of £169.40 for travelling on a train without having paid the fare of £6.40. Haynes was also fined £75 and ordered to pay £3.20 compensation for travelling on a train without having paid the fare of £3.20. Tracy Shanks, 42, of Brookcote Drive, Littlestoke, Bristol, was fined £30 and ordered to pay costs of £85 for using a vehicle which was unlicensed. Mumini Olakunlashida, 34, of Soundwell Road, Staple Hill, Bristol, was fined £70, ordered to pay costs of £30 and had 3 points put on his license, for speeding. Lee Weeks, 42, of Wincliffe Crescent, Bristol, was fined £70, ordered to pay costs of £115 and had 3 points put on his license, for speeding. Alexander Fright, 36, of Chequers Court, Palmer's Lees, Bradley Stoke, was fined £307, ordered to pay costs of £115 and had 5 points put on his license, for speeding. Katie Staples, 30, of Ryan Walk, Fishponds, was fined £40 and ordered to pay costs of £115 for using a TV without a license. Richard Cameron, 36, of Berkeley House, Snow Hill, Bath, was handed a 12-month conditional discharge and ordered to pay compensation and costs of £700 for stealing a handbag worth £180, 2 handbags worth £320 from Jolly's, and 2 handbags from TK Maxx. Francis Kerrigan, 18, of Rose Meadow View, South Liberty Lane, Bristol, was handed a 12-month conditional discharge and ordered to pay costs of £20 for cannabis possession. David Mervyn Emery, 31, of Coomdale, Bristol, was fined £55 and ordered to pay costs and compensation of £385 for damaging a glass front door belonging to Peeps Peri Peri Chicken. Kirsty Margaret Phillips, 42, of Green Close, Horfield, had a community order revoked for failing to comply with it by failing to attend for unpaid work. She was handed a new community order with 70 hours of unpaid work. The original offences were 3 counts of fraud by false representation. She must also pay costs of £60. It was ordered that a pit bull terrier-type dog called Luna be destroyed unless it is kept under proper control by being neutered, microchipped, and third-party insurance must be obtained. Order made to John Mason, Belmore Road, Bristol. Thursday, February 7, George Hughes, 18, of Bishop Sutton, was sent to a young offender institution for 4 months for assault by beating and destroying a bathroom door. He was also ordered to pay costs of £30. The court register states it was a blatant and vile offence causing extreme impact on victim. Aaron Gardiner, 33, of Dingley Lane, Yate, was handed a community order and ordered to pay compensation and costs of £183.30 for damaging a window and door and breaching a restraining order. He must have treatment for alcohol dependency as part of the order. Wayne Kissick, 36, of Sylvan Way, C. Mills, had his community order revoked and was handed a new community order for failing to comply with it by failing to show up for appointments. He will now be under a curfew for 12 weeks with electronic monitoring, requiring him to remain indoors between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. each day. The original offences were assault by beating and a public order offence. Richard Hargraves denied revenge porn allegation at Bristol Magistrates Court. Image, Dave Betts. Brandon Bricker, 18, of Sutton Avenue, Brislington, Bristol, was handed a 9-month conditional discharge for assault. He must pay costs of £105. Ian Cornell, 54, of Balmoral Court, Mangotsfield, was fined £80 and ordered to pay costs of £115 for stealing a travel card. Bernard I. Goff, 55, of No Fixed Abode, was handed a 3-month conditional discharge for interfering with a motor vehicle. Danny Lee Kennedy, 32, of Barton Hill Road, Bristol, was handed a 12-month conditional discharge for stealing meat from Co-op. He was ordered to pay costs and compensation of £135. Matthew Luxton, 38, of Coates Walk, Knoll, was fined £80 and ordered to pay costs of £115 for dishonestly causing to be wasted or diverted a quantity of electricity to the value of £1,966. Brooke O'Doherty, 21, of Downscote Gardens, Bristol, was fined £168 and disqualified from driving for 12 months, for drink driving. He must also pay costs of £115. Natasha Marie Williams, 36, of Woodmancote, Yate, was fined £80 and disqualified from driving for 23 months, for drink driving. She must also pay costs of £115. 5 terrifying murders in Bristol that still remain unsolved. Andrea Zerial, 34, of Cheltenham Lane, Montpelier, Bristol, was fined £300 and disqualified from driving for 20 months, for drink driving and driving without due care and attention. He must also pay costs of £115. Catherine Bowers, 48, of Filton Avenue, Horfield, was fined £80 and ordered to pay compensation and costs of £441 for stealing perfume from John Lewis at Cribbs Causeway. Daniel Michael Mosley, 25, of Littlestoke Lane, Littlestoke, South Gloucestershire, was fined £275 and disqualified from driving for 40 months, for drink driving. He must also pay costs of £115. Carl Preen, 29, of the Culvert, Bradley Stoke, was fined £438 and disqualified from driving for 20 months, for drink driving. He must also pay costs of £128. Bristol Magistrates Court. Image, Dave Betts, Ashley Berry, 37, of Turtlegate Avenue, Withywood, was handed a community order and fined £80 for possessing tablets of diazepam, cannabis, stealing toys from Mankind at Cribs Causeway, and doing so while subject to a conditional discharge for theft and possession of diamorphine and dihydrocodeine. He must also pay costs of £170. Anna Cronk-Schnabel, 54, of Badminton Road, St Paul's, Bristol, was fined £40 in order to pay costs of £115 for 2 counts of possessing cannabis, and 1 of diamorphine. Denny Moore, 28, of Landseer Avenue, Bristol, was handed a community order requiring him to do 100 hours of unpaid work for assault. He was also ordered to pay costs and compensation of £470. Marie Woodman, 34, of Bantry Road, Knoll, was handed a 12-month conditional discharge and ordered to pay costs of £105 for stealing groceries from Morrison's. Lee Parkinson, 46, of St Mark's Road, Bristol, was handed a community order for stealing cosmetics from Marks & Spencer in Broadmead and perfume from Debenhams, and failing to surrender to custody. He must have treatment for drug dependency. Lee Parkinson was also convicted of a racially aggravated offense of using threatening, abusive or insulting words or behavior or disorderly behavior causing harassment, alarm or distress. He was ordered to pay £340 compensation for this. Lyndon MacDonald, 19, of Hampton Street, Bristol, was handed a community order requiring him to do 120 hours of unpaid work for using threatening, abusive or insulting words or behavior with intent to cause fear of violence. The court registers states 20 hours of unpaid work was added to reflect the homophobic element. He must also pay costs of £170. Donald McMillan, 45, of Ashley Down Road, Bristol, was handed a community order requiring him to do 80 hours of unpaid work and was disqualified from driving for 18 months, for refusing to provide a specimen of breath, driving without a license and without insurance, and cannabis possession. He must also pay costs of £170. Gary Dark, 38, of Wesley Avenue, Westfield, Redstock, was fined £100 and ordered to pay costs of £30 for possessing alprazolam and buprenorphine. Robert Smith, 39, of Jamaica Street, Bristol, was fined £50 for failing to comply with a community by failing to show up for appointments. Marcus Stroud, 25, of No Fixed Abode, was sent to prison for 32 weeks, for failing to comply with the supervision requirements imposed following release from prison, for failing to comply with a Sexual Offences Act 2003 notification order by failing to register that he was of no fixed abode, failing to inform police that he was using an alias of Mark A. Dawes and possessing a knife in public. He must also pay costs of £115. The court register states, offense so serious because length of previous convictions, failure to comply with court orders. Saturday, February 9, Marina Dublianco, 34, of Walsh Avenue, Hengrove, was handed a 6-month conditional discharge and ordered to pay costs of £115 for possessing a false Romanian ID card. Lee Taylor, 42, of Harvey's Lane, St. George, Bristol, was sent to prison for 12 weeks, for 2 counts of breaching a retraining order, for using threatening or abusive words or behavior, or disorderly behavior likely to cause harassment, alarm or distress, and the offense was racially aggravated, and doing so while out on a suspended sentence for breaching a restraining order. He must also pay costs of £200. Aaron Evans, 31, of No Fixed Abode, was handed a community order requiring him to have treatment for drug dependency, for stealing fragrance sets from Boots and shirts from Hollister, and doing so while subject to a community order for shoplifting. He must also pay costs and compensation of £500.